Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this new week of morning studies. And we're going to continue looking at what we've been studying in, First and Second Samuel, and I guess now we're going into Kings. But before we do that, let's have a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are very thankful that you've come into these studies over this past while in giving us light. And again, we invite your presence through your Spirit to guide and direct the things that we study. We pray for one another. We need your help in our day-to-day lives. And there's many things that each of us are facing that we need dependence upon you. So we just ask that the things that we study will strengthen us in our relationship with you. So be with us now. And we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, well, good morning again. So Dwight, you sent this paper to some of us here.
Right.
Can you explain again what your position was? Because I was understanding that you were trying to say that they're going to begin the marching around Jericho on the 16th day of the first month. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So how does this paper help that position?
All right. You remember your premise? What you said?
My premise is that they have to keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread before they go marching around Jericho.
There's nowhere in Scripture that says that they do nothing during the Feast of Unleavened Bread.
No, they do something during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. They keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread. There's nothing that says that they immediately go and march around Jericho.
Well, your premise yesterday was
I'm saying part of it is that you're obviously they get circumcised after they cross the Jordan. Now you're saying that some of them were already circumcised, but still we know that there's a bunch of people being circumcised. And they
let's in this situation. I think we can agree that Genesis 17 presents the circumcision ordinance to the children of Israel.
Yeah, because that's going to be the circumcision of Ishmael.
No, it's the circumcision of every man in Abraham's house.
Right. Yeah, but first it's starting with Ishmael is the issue. Right, isn't it?
I thought it first started with Abraham and then went to everyone within his house before.
Yeah, but it's after Ishmael is born, is what I'm saying.
All right.
Right? That's what I understood.
Okay.
I could be wrong, but that's what I remembered. It was that it's going to start after Ishmael's birth. But anyway, so here it says, this is my cupcake, Stephen.
Yeah, so Ishmael's going to be maybe about 13 years old.
Yeah. But it's going to start after Ishmael's born, and then they're going to introduce this circumcision situation, right? That there wasn't circumcision before Ishmael is all, right?
He was not circumcised on the 8th day after his birth.
No, he's not. No, he's not circumcised on the 8th day. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying it's in this situation. Anyway, I just remember when we went through it, the way that I connected it was he wanted Ishmael to be the heir, right? Like, so after he goes through this whole thing of trying to fulfill God's promises, and he has Ishmael, then we're going to have circumcision. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
Right? So, yeah. So it's going to be before the birth of Isaac. Right?
I would agree.
Yeah. Okay. So that's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, like, they never talked about circumcision prior to this time, to Genesis chapter 17.
There again, I would agree.
Yeah. And my understanding from a historical point of view is that in the pagan nations, priests were circumcised. That is, circumcision was something that did exist in that society, but it was only for priests. And when God provides circumcision that all the males are circumcised, that this is the idea that you have a kingdom of priests. So it's not even going to just be the firstborn son, that all the males would be circumcised. So it was kind of a statement, but that's sort of from extra biblical information. So it wasn't like the Jews were the only people that ever circumcised, from historical documents, but that could be disputed. Okay, so we're going to have here in chapter 17, we're going to have the covenant of circumcision.
All right. Now, this ordinance had been given to Abram about 1939 BC, correct?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's about it, because you're going to have in 1963 that he leaves Haran. And so that would be how many years later that's going to be?
No, that goes the other way. I mean, if it's 1963, that's 24 years earlier.
Yeah,
he's going to be born. He's going to be born in 1963. Is that it?
Who's born in 63?
Is it Abraham? No, Haran. No, he's born in 20.
No, he leaves Haran in 1963.
Yeah.
So I don't know. So you're saying that this is going to be. So how do you base this? Because when is Ishmael born? Anybody do that?
He's born in 1952 BC.
1952. So
Right.
11 years after Abraham leaves Haran.
Yes.
Okay. So that means he would be then, well, in 1939, then he would be 13, right?
Yes.
Okay. So that makes sense. Okay, go on, Dwight.
So my point was that there is no biblical evidence that this ordinance was to be suspended during their time in Egypt.
It was.
Really?
Ellen White plainly says it was.
Really?
No. Oh, you meant in Egypt? No. In Egypt it wasn't suspended. No.
Okay.
Yeah, because obviously they couldn't have. But during the wilderness, it's suspended.
Well, okay. That's going to be a point for us to address.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we know that it's suspended during the time in the wilderness. That nobody's going to be circumcised when they're relegated to wandering in the wilderness.
Well, you had Moses' sons; they had to be circumcised, didn't they, before he went into Egypt?
Yeah.
That is before the children of Israel left Egypt.
Yeah, when they left Egypt. Now, yeah. So the question is, so you're saying, so Moses didn't circumcise. He wasn't circumcised. He had to be circumcised, right? Or how did that go?
Okay. Moses, of course, was a Levite. On the eighth, I believe the case can be made that on the 8th day he was circumcised.
Yeah, but he didn't circumcise his sons.
His youngest son.
Okay, the youngest son. Okay. And then he has to be circumcised before he begins his mission.
The youngest son had to be circumcised, and it was his wife that did the circumcision.
Yeah.
That's why she commented that thou art a bridegroom of blood unto me, right?
Yeah. Bloody husband, the King James says. But
okay. Now, circumcision was especially noted for those of the tribe of Levi for their service within the temple, within the tabernacle and sanctuary.
Yeah.
Now, there are sources that have suggested that the Levites had a strong connection to Egypt and in Egypt that circumcising was emphasized because it was an Egyptian practice for priests and nobility, which would have further linked the Levites into this situation in Egypt.
Right, and that's what I was saying is that that's one of the reasons all of the children are supposed to be circumcised, because they're kingdom priests, right? But that practice was Egyptians practice circumcision and some other groups practice circumcision for their priests. And I guess they say nobility as well.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, by the time we get to Numbers, and I believe as we're looking at this, the situation that we're going to see in the book of Exodus and then Leviticus. By the time we're into Numbers, we're in the second year after the Exodus. Would that be correct?
Well, yeah, it says second month, second year.
Okay. First day of the second month in the second year. So we have the 2-2 symbol.
Right.
And Moses is told by the Lord, take ye the sum of all the congregation of the children of Israel after their families, by the house of their fathers, with the number of their names, every male by their polls.
Mm-hmm.
From 20 years old and upward, all that were able to go forth to war in Israel. Thou and Aaron shall number them by their armies.
Mm-hmm.
So in this situation, we're to understand that there's a census that was taken
Mm-hmm.
for every male that was 20 years old or older.
Did you say the second day or the first day of the month?
First day of the second month in the second year.
Okay. All right.
All right.
I'm sorry, Dwight.
No, you're fine. So beginning in Numbers 1:19, which of course has no significance as a symbol for us whatsoever. Going to Numbers 1:45, the men of war were numerated, and we get this presented in Numbers 1:46. Even all they that were numbered were 600,000 and 3,550. So 603,550.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this didn't include Levites, but this was the number of those men above the age of 20 that crossed the Red Sea.
Yep.
Now, Numbers 13:2, send thou men that they may search the land of Canaan, which I gave unto the children of Israel. Of every tribe of their fathers shall you send a man, every one a ruler among them. So we have 12 spies that went, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where we have 2 that return positive, 10 that return negative, and this is occurring in the second year after they've left Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
Just going back, what you said about the number that crossed the Red Sea. So this would be like a year, well, maybe not quite a year, but maybe 10 months, maybe, or maybe 11 months or whatever it is.
Yeah, after they crossed
since the Red Sea. So maybe there could have been some men then who were 19 at that time, and now they're 20, and now they're being numbered with those
Mm-hmm.
above 20. Just a thought.
Right. So the idea is, though, that those people did cross the Red Sea, even if they were 19 at the time. They're not 20, but they did cross the Red Sea.
Right. Okay.
Right. It's just, and there might be some more children born after they crossed the Red Sea, but the point is that these people, they're now 20. When they crossed the Red Sea, they wouldn't have been 20, but they still did cross the Red Sea.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Now, after this, the children of Israel rebel, and they brought upon themselves a judgment direct from Jehovah. So you have Numbers 14:22 to 31. Because all those men which have seen my glory and my miracles, which I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and have tempted me now these 10 times, have not hearkened unto my voice. Surely they shall not see the land which I swear unto their fathers, neither shall any of them that provoked me see it. Your carcasses shall fall in the wilderness, and all that were numbered of you, according to your whole number, from 20 years old and upward, which have murmured against me. Doubtless ye shall not come into the land concerning which I swear to make you dwell therein, save Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua the son of Nun. But your little ones, which you said should be a prey, them will I bring in, and they shall know the land which you have despised. So what is being said here? Your children are going to go into the land of promise, but you're not.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, you understand that.
Now, in Numbers 26:51, we have a second census. At that time, 38 years after this judgment is pronounced, the census is taken, and it shows that 601,730 men of war, 20 years of age and older are now in the camp of Israel. Now, it's kind of interesting to me when I'm looking at this that some tribes like Simeon had lost a substantial number of their men because they were down almost 63%, while others like Manasseh were up almost 64%. But there was only 0.3% difference from the first census after the Exodus to the census before the entry into the Promised Land. Now, I don't know if any of these numbers are going to have any significance in any of our other studies, but I found it interesting.
Yeah, well, we actually went through this in detail and have a chart of all the different tribes and the numberings and I don't know if you remember all that.
Well, I've got one now as well.
Yeah, so because we went through this in detail in the past. Let me see if I can bring it up. I had it in an Excel spreadsheet. And I don't know what it would be called. Numbering the tribes. So just to show people this here. So here we have all the different tribes. And I have first, in Numbers 1 and 2, the numbers that are given, and in Numbers 26. And there's the two totals, and there's the differences for each of the tribes, how much they increased or decreased, and then the difference between these two. So it's 1,820 difference between these two totals. And then I did this chart where I divided it in by the number of days as a 365-day year, 360-day year, and then how many lunar months and how many 30-day months they would be, and etc. So for each of the different countings, right? So there's 4 different analyses of each of them. Anyway, that's the chart that I did. I did more too. I dealt with this chart as well. I can't remember what I was analyzing here. We analyzed that. Other charts that I looked at all kinds of different numbers. But anyway, so we did that in detail before.
Yeah, I find it just interesting that the difference is 1,820.
Yeah.
If you were to compare that to 2520, there's 700 of difference. So therefore you would have 1820 plus 700. Maybe you could maybe see a July 18 maybe symbol there.
Yeah, that's interesting. The other thing was just the number of days from creation to the flood is pretty similar to these numbers. Some of the people have tried to associate the number of days from creation to the flood with the numbering of the tribes.
It's also very near 777 squared.
Yeah.
I think it's like 129 extra, 179 extra.
Yeah, so it is really close because it's 7 squared is 777 squared is 6037 729. Yeah. So that's how many difference? 550 minus. So that's
Is it 129 or?
Yeah. So the difference is 179 is the difference.
Okay.
Okay. So Dwight.
Right. Now in Joshua 5:4, and this is the cause why Joshua did circumcise all the people that came out of Egypt that were males. All the men of war died in the wilderness by the way after they came out of Egypt. Now all the people that came out were circumcised, but all the people that were born in the wilderness by the way as they came forth out of Egypt, them they had not circumcised.
Yeah. So you have roughly, I guess half the male population has not been circumcised, something like that.
I was going to say a third. I was going to say 2/3.
Okay. But so 2/3 are not circumcised?
Well, I'm using a rough guess.
Okay.
Because you're going to have the males that were less than 20 at the time that this judgment is pronounced
Yeah.
that would have been circumcised.
Yeah. And then you're going to go another 38 years.
Correct.
And then you're going to have all those born in that 38. Yeah. So roughly, I guess, definitely more than half are not circumcised.
Okay.
So all those who was over 20 years old was dead in the wilderness.
Correct.
Yeah. Except for a few odd ones. Because obviously,
We had Joshua and Caleb.
yeah. And there might have been some other just weren't notable, right? There could be some elderly people, but I don't know.
Well, in this situation, I look at it that if 2/3 of 601,000 men
Mm-hmm.
had been circumcised or had not been circumcised.
Had not been, yeah. So you're going to have, 400,000 men need to be circumcised.
But that leaves you 200,000 men of war that could easily have marched around Jericho without having any pain or any other problem.
Right? I understand that, but that's not what the Bible describes. It doesn't single out that only certain groups of people are going to march around. It appears that the children of Israel march around the city.
I believe that when we go to the reference that I gave at the end,
Okay.
4A Spiritual Gifts, page 59.3, that Mrs. White makes it very clear that these were the men of war.
Okay, but still, the men of war would include 2/3 of them that were just circumcised. But that's not the main argument that I'm making, that they have the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and there's just no indication that they're going to begin marching around Jericho on the second day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread.
What you had said yesterday was that it was not possible for them to do this, that it would be more possible for them to do it on the 29th day of the first month.
I said the 23rd day of the first month would make the most sense to start doing it after the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But it doesn't give us any indication of the span of time from when they kept the Passover to when the marching around Jericho occurred. The only thing we know is that it begins on the first day of the first month, or the first day of the month, first day of the week, pardon me. So it begins on a Sunday, right? Because the last day is going to be a Sabbath. So we know that. But there's no indication that this happens immediately. And still you would have 2/3 of the men of war that would have just been circumcised.
When I
look, and I don't remember ever saying something's not possible, but I said it's not. I don't think that there's nothing that shows that it happened that way. It wouldn't make sense to me that they're going to begin marching around Jericho just when they're the first time they're keeping the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It would make sense that they're going to complete the keeping of the Feast of Unleavened Bread before they start marching around Jericho.
The purpose behind what I was doing here.
Mm-hmm.
When you said yesterday that you could not see them marching around Jericho because they had just been circumcised, I looked because I do not, I don't see a problem if you're sending 1/3 of your army to march around
But it doesn't say they're sending 1/3 of their army, right?
You said it wasn't possible for them to do it at all.
Okay. Well, I don't know about using the word not possible. But anyway, but my point still is not about the circumcision. That's not my main argument. That was just one of the arguments. So my main argument is there's nothing that indicates that this occurred right after keeping the Passover. There's nothing that indicates that this would have occurred on the 16th day of the first month.
But that's not what you said yesterday.
Well, it is what I said. So I made 3 different arguments. First is that we don't know how long it is. There's no indication of time in the story, right? Because when we read in the Bible, sometimes it can seem like things happen immediately after, and we know they can be years later. So there's nothing that indicates that immediately they're going to begin marching around Jericho. The other argument is, I understood that there are some people that had already been circumcised, but it's pretty clear that 2/3 of the men around that number had not been circumcised while they were in the wilderness, and they're going to have just been circumcised. And then the other one is that the main argument for me is that they're keeping the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and this is a sacred feast, and there would be no indication that they're doing this during the time that they're marching around Jericho. It doesn't make any sense to me. That's the main thing to me, is the main argument. But we have no indication that only one third of the men of war are going to be marching around Jericho. So why do you need them marching around Jericho and finishing it on the 22nd day of the first month?
It's not a need. It was when I started going through this.
Yeah.
We know that this began on the first day of the week. It ended on a Sabbath. If it ended on the 22nd day of the first month, that becomes an even more powerful symbol, because first, yes, they would have been celebrating this Feast of Unleavened Bread, but with their army, for lack of a better term, in pain, being less than full strength, and doing this by God's command, they would have been fully reliant upon him and not reliant upon themselves.
Okay. Yeah. See, I have a real problem with this. So, and my problem is, never do I try to get something to fit just because, it's a better symbol or something like that. So I have a natural resistance to saying, well, this fits with this symbol, so let's make it fit with the symbol. That's the way my thinking works, right? So I would say, because I just don't do that. Now, if all the evidence is that it fits with the symbol, then I'll accept that symbol applies, right? But I can't see any indication that this is the case. Now, is it possible? Well, it is possible, but there would be a number of things that we would have to take into account. So one is, Ellen White and the Bible doesn't give any indication that 1/3 of the men of war are going to march around the city. So that kind of, to me, is a moot point, right? That whether, because obviously God could have them march around the city even if they had been circumcised, because he could, preserve them in that, right? They could have maybe no pain. So that's always possible. But the Bible doesn't say anything about it, right? It doesn't say that, he did some miracle so that they could march around the city. And it doesn't say that there's just 1/3 of the men of war marched around the city, right? So I would think, even with Ellen White's statement, that the men are going to be doing the marching, if that's the case. But still, it's not just 1/3. It seems to be all of them. The other thing to me is that there's nothing in the language that suggests that Jericho occurs immediately after the wave offering. Like, sure, we know that the wave offering is mentioned. The next thing's mentioned is Jericho. But there's nothing in the language that connects that chronologically. And then there's just the simple fact that they're keeping the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is a sacred feast, that wouldn't be something that they're going to be having a war during. And if they did, that would specifically be mentioned, that happened during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So to me, the silence on that would be evidence that it's not the case. But you want me to prove you wrong? Well, there's no way to prove somebody wrong, because we just don't have any information on it, right? There's just complete silence in that regard. So you understand how I think there, Dwight.
Okay. My point, based on the way you approached it yesterday,
Mm-hmm.
was to come back and say that there's a possibility and
Okay.
that there's a way that this could have occurred.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't remember saying it's impossible, but maybe I used those words. But I gave 3 reasons, not one, right?
You're giving your reasons now. Thank you.
Well, I did give them yesterday. I gave those 3 reasons yesterday. But yeah, so but I mean, I still think it's good to go through this, right? To go through the discussion. But I still don't I still don't understand why you would take that position in the first place. Like, it just doesn't, to me, it doesn't seem to be logical. It wouldn't be a logical conclusion that I would draw from the text. It would be something that I would have to be forcing to fit. That's the way that I would look at it. You understand what I'm saying there?
I think you have made your point.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's a good point. I mean, the good to go through this, because the one thing that people might accuse us of is, and they have, is, well, you have these dates, or you have this, coincidence of something, and you've just made it up, right? That is, you force something into a box. They do that with the 2520 with Manasseh's captivity, right? They just say, oh, you took this prism B and you just said, well, this is S.R. Hayden, and that fits with your idea, so that's why you did that. Or you have this chronology of the 430 years of Ezekiel. So you just made this chronology fit the prophecy of Josiah, and so people looking at something that we do, they could say, well, you had this conclusion, and then you maneuvered the data to fit some conclusion. But we never did that, right? Like, we never did that. We worked out the chronology first, right? We worked out the dates first, and we can see this happening again and again, like, for instance, dealing with the wave offering. So we had this chronology of when the Exodus occurred a long time ago, right? I hadn't even taken into account the days of the week at all when I first worked on the chronology. I didn't know enough in how to do that, right? And yet, when we looked at the falling of the manna, it fit perfectly with the chronology we had of the Exodus. And that's extremely unlikely. And almost nobody who has a date for the Exodus ever even takes into account the days of the week for the falling of the manna. And as far as I know, I could only ever find one person on the internet who even tried to calculate when the manna fell. Now, they had the wrong years completely, and they don't really take into account how the calendar worked, right? So they just kind of say it's 40 years less a month, but they're not really sure how that works, right? So anyway, that would be, I think, an important point for people to see watching the video is how we approach things. That it's not like, here we have a symbol, so we're going to choose this and somehow try to make it work. But that's my natural reaction to what you were saying on Thursday. Is it just seemed to me that you were doing that type of thing, which I wouldn't do. And the evidence wouldn't be in that direction. So I know I didn't hurt your feelings or anything, but at least I hope I didn't. But you understand now, right? How I think.
When I looked at this,
yeah,
when I'm looking at potentially a third of considered the men of war,
mm-hmm.
I compare that against military history that I have some familiarity with. Now,
yeah, you wouldn't have to have all of the soldiers necessarily marching in an operation.
Correct.
No.
Now,
and a person could make an argument that maybe on the 7th day, everyone marched around because now they were feeling better.
Okay.
Right. I mean, that kind of argument could be made. I just don't see any indication in the story that we would put it that soon, especially considering that they are keeping this Feast of Unleavened Bread. And it is, the first and the last day of the feast are important. So, it just doesn't seem consistent, but I could be wrong, right? Like you could be wrong too. But you see, my point is that there's nothing that indicates this in either Bible or Spirit of Prophecy, that this is immediately happening right after. But I would think that it probably does happen beginning on the 23rd. That would, to me, be the most logical place to put the beginning. So they're going to complete the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and then they're going to begin marching around Jericho. But even then, I couldn't prove that it's the next week. It could be a couple of weeks later, right? There's just no indication of the time element involved, So, okay?
Okay.
So, but no hard feelings, I know. Like, I'm not going to imagine that you even are in the slightest bit vexed with me. So, if you were, I would know it. I'm pretty sure.
Right.
Okay. Now, why did we get to this initially? Because we were looking at the numbering that's going to happen where does that numbering occur? I'm trying to remember.
As a point, I did not bring this up Thursday. I brought it up yesterday.
Oh, it was yesterday?
Yeah.
Well, why did we bring it up yesterday then? What was going on then yesterday?
I had been looking at different things, going back into Joshua as well as some other of the studies that we'd done before. And there were just different things that I saw that when I was looking at some of these and reading through tabled history again, that I began looking at this whole situation.
Oh, right. And it was because of the date that Ellen White had.
Yes.
Right?
Correct.
So that was the 22nd day of the first month.
Correct.
Okay, now I remember. Okay. That seems like a long time ago. That was yesterday.
Just yesterday morning.
Guess a lot's happened since yesterday morning. Okay, so now we are going to have the numbering that David is going to do, right? Now, where was that numbering that David did?
We get into that in 2 Samuel.
Yeah, it's the last chapter. Okay, so that's why I was thinking we were dealing with it on Thursday. Okay, so so let's go over here. So we had looked at David's census. Now, in this census, the question is, and just going back, so God had them number the men of war twice, right? And that's also going to be addressed like in Numbers chapter 3, because they're even going to deal with the numbering of the Levites and the firstborn. So Numbers 1 and 2, you're going to have the numbering of all the tribes. And then chapter 3, specifically, the Levites, right, are going to be numbered, right?
Agreed.
Okay. So what was wrong particularly with what David was doing in numbering the tribes? And I want to apply this like within our movement, what this represents.
It's pride in it was pride in and what was the other one? I read it in the quote, Miss White. She said it was pride and ambition.
Okay, yeah. So we understand that there's pride there. There's a lack of trust in God. But what I'm not talking about in that history. I'm talking about in our history. What is it about the numbering of the tribes that happen in Numbers 1 and 2 and Numbers 3 and Numbers 26, and then David numbering? So David represents July 18, 2020, right? So David's census must represent some error within the movement in what it's doing that was permitted in the past but isn't permitted now. Okay, Dwight, Kelly's asking a question. Can you answer the question for Kelly, just to make it clear? You there, Dwight? I guess Dwight's not there. So we kind of answered that question, Kelly. So the idea was that there's 1/3 of the men of war that already had been circumcised prior to the wandering in the wilderness, and 2/3 that were circumcised after the wandering in the wilderness. Does that help answer your question, Kelly? Okay. So the question that I have relating to that there is something that's allowed. God is going to direct the numbering of the children of Israel, the men of war, in Numbers 1 and 2 and 3, and in Numbers 26. So what is David paralleling, or what is in our history, in his numbering of the children of Israel? And then also the judgment that's going to come upon David for numbering the children of Israel. Does that parallel anything in our history? Any thoughts on that? Could that have something to do with time setting? That July 18, 2020 was not meant to predict an event, some external event, that it was a witness against time setting in our movement. Could that be illustrated by this? William, do you have a comment? Stephen, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I'm just sort of thinking, how would that then work with warning Nashville? Should we not have warned Nashville in the way we did?
Could we have warned Nashville without giving a date?
Probably not as effectively as what occurred.
Yeah. So obviously in God's providence, we can see, just like with October 22nd, 1844. Should the Millerites have proclaimed October 22nd, 1844, that Christ is returning? Well, we can see that they were wrong, but in God's providence, things worked out. But there still is a consequence of that, right?
Yes, but even if they had it right, it's kind of, I think it was God had his hand over it.
Well, he had his hand, so he had his hand over the mistake in the charts, which affected which disappointment?
Well, part of the movement thought that they was going to be lifted up if it came to pass.
Oh, the first disappointment in the spring.
Yeah. So we have to remember that the first disappointment is the one that the mistake is about, right? And often it's misunderstood within Adventism. That is, most Adventists think that the mistake was recognized after the first disappointment, but they already recognized the mistake back in 1843. Because in 1843, they're now trying to figure out, as they're getting closer to that date, well, when exactly do the prophetic periods end? And they have to take into account that there's no 0 year. They hadn't noticed that before. And so they're going to, in order to preserve the date 1843, they're going to make an argument that we have to take into account the fullness of the year. And if we count the fullness of the year and we count those 2,300 full years from the spring, because they have the decree being issued in the spring, so they're not going to talk about the fall, they're just going to talk about the spring, then it would end in the spring of 1843. Those full years would have been completed. So they're going to count from the first day of the first month, and they're going to count the full years to the last day of the 12th month in 1843, which would be in the spring of 1844. Now, they're not going to have the correct calendar. That is, they haven't even really dealt with the biblical calendar at that point. So when the hand is removed, it still takes some time for them to sort through how that affects things. Now, sure, Samuel Snow is going to start to understand that prior to the end of Miller's prediction, and that's going to be, empowered in the 7th month movement. But that's the mistake that was hid on the chart. Now, they did make a mistake as to what was going to happen. That is, they believed that the earth was going to be cleansed by fire. So that's a different mistake altogether. And we made a mistake in regard to Nashville being hit by a fireball. But was it wrong for the Millerites to proclaim that Jesus was coming back in 1843, or about the year 1843? I mean, obviously that warning needed to happen, just as the warning for Nashville needed to happen. And, it's hard to say, well, if it had happened differently, would it have been effective? So did God not just generally want us to make these mistakes? Well, the reason why we need to make the mistakes has to do with our character ultimately, right? That God is not, he's using what he has as far as the human beings, but we're a faulty. So he allows us to make these mistakes because he's not just going to interpose, just like you're not going to try to, force a rose to bloom, or, break open the shell of a chick that's, help it out when it's trying to get out of its shell. Those are going to be counterproductive. So if we're going to take this census of David and we're going to align it with the time setting that we did with July 18th, as Seventh-day Adventists, we have a really clear message regarding time setting. Should we have not taken into account the counsels in the spirit of prophecy regarding setting dates?
Well, that was much deliberated, by Jeff, that prior to 2018, that we don't time set.
Yeah. And then when he did, now the one thing I don't fully understand, and maybe you understand it better, Stephen, but in, when Jeff is now going to support time setting, so they're going to have the meeting there in Italy in 2018, and Parminder is going to present, I guess technically the day after the camp meeting, so on the 10th of June. He's going to present this argument that we're going to set time. And Jeff is going to accept that. Now, I don't believe I've ever seen that presentation that Parminder did. Did that presentation get lost or damaged or something?
I'm not aware. I thought it was maybe put up initially because it was part of it was Future is Now. So that was the Blazings. The Blazings had put them up on their own website. So that was where they were initially published on their YouTube. So I wouldn't think it'd be there now, but
no, but I never saw it at the time. There was something about that in 2018 when I was there that it was just unavailable for some reason. That there was some problem in recording it is what I remember. But I never did see it. So I never saw Parminder's presentation. Now, Jeff then in the beginning of August, he's going to be in Alberta in 2018. That's when he invites Heidi and I to come. But so when he does his presentations, I don't think he got there on the 6th. Our presentations went from the 6th of August to I think the 11th of August or something like that. But anyway, Jeff is going to talk about time setting. I know Kelly was there, right? So he's going to talk about, all of the arguments against time setting. And then he's going to just say, well, now we're going to be setting time. Now, of course, I've always been opposed to time setting. Now, what I understood then is, well, if we're going to do time setting, it can't be against Ellen White's direct counsel. But Parminder had made an argument that was a dispensational argument. And Jeff reiterates that argument, which I rejected. So the argument was, now Jeff never articulated it as a dispensational argument, but I recognized it as a dispensational argument. And later Parminder is going to explicitly say it is a dispensational argument. But initially when he presents it in the context of that it doesn't apply to us because of the time that we're in within the lines. And he used the argument of no public evangelism. So we have all this counsel about evangelism in the spirit of prophecy, and we took the position that, well, right at this time, we're not to do public evangelism, right? So you're familiar with that argument, Stephen, of how Parminder used that and how Jeff then adopted that argument, right?
Yeah, I think that was the main hook that allowed the potential for time setting.
Right. Now, but then I understood if that was the case, then that would mean that time setting could only be an internal type of time setting. So my position was that time setting had to do with something in the movement that was internal. Now, I didn't fully understand, of course, Parminder's apostasy at that time. I did believe that there was a separation that was going to happen in the movement. And because of my studies back in 2017, dealing with Samuel Snow's letters, I understood that those two Passovers, the false one where Snow's first article is republished in the Signs of the Times, and then the true Passover when Snow's second article is published, that showed this separation of the two classes, right? The false priests from the true priests. So I believe that this time setting of November 9th would relate to the separation within the movement. I just didn't expect it to happen the way that it did. I didn't foresee, Parminder's group, being labeled, the Omega and etc. Right? But we can see then that the time setting associated with July 18th. July 18th was, in my understanding, an attack against Parminder's time setting. And I saw that fairly early on that it was in response to November 9th, but I didn't fully understand how that applied, right? Until, the rebellion happened. I thought that it was going to correct, like I thought Parminder would be corrected and Tess would be corrected by July 18th, right? I didn't think that it would cause that separation of the groups, but it's all connected, right? So November 9th, July 18th, December 25th, these are all waymarks within our movement that show this separation that occurred within the movement. Now, if we take David's census as relating to time setting with July 18th, we also have some other things that we would have to consider. So we have, well, and I know we went through it, but we didn't really, I don't think, complete this study. So again, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel and moved David against them to say, go number Israel and Judah. So first off, the anger of the Lord is already kindled against Israel, and he's going to move David against them to say, go number Israel and Judah. What does that mean? If we're going to apply it. Yeah. Okay, Stephen.
So would that mean that the people of Israel had that Gedol aspect already in their hearts? And then when David sort of went to then initiate that time setting, that they were, in a way, this is kind of fitting or character?
Yeah. So when we look at the movement, that God was trying to correct the movement. So July 18th is given by God to move David, being July 18th, right, to set time. And that would be in response to November 9th, right? So that's already what I think, right, that happened. So the way that I look at the time setting is we had Parminder do this time setting way back in 2012, right? So in 2012, he's going to use the Daniel chapter 5 to give this 2014 date by counting the Mene Tekel Upharsin, right? So he's going to have two different counts. I don't know if he originally had the two different counts, the one from 1863 and the other one from 1888. But I just remember the 1888 one at that time. So he's going to count 126 shekels from 1888, say that the Sunday law is going to happen in 2014. And Jeff is going to recognize that that's fanaticism. He's going to label it as fanaticism. As far as I know, Parminder's going to be, on the outs, and I'd never expected to see Parminder as part of anything again. But Parminder shows up in 2015 at the Alberta camp meeting, and he gets back into Jeff's good book somehow. I'm not sure how that happened. I don't know what happened behind the scenes. But then we're going to have this time setting slowly revised, or revived, I should say. It is revised, but it's also revived. And that's going to be where Parminder is going to argue that his calculation was correct. It's just that he had the wrong event, right? It wasn't the Sunday law. It was the separation that happened in 2014 in the movement. But he's building a case for bringing in time setting again. Now, all that stuff that happened in 2017 with the organizational camp meeting in Romania in September of 2017, the secretive meetings, the banishment of Chawatu and Kimberly, and just all of the stuff that was happening, and him teaching about the nature of man, which is a false teaching on the nature of Christ. So all those things that were happening, they were building towards something. So we have within this movement already some major problems. So now, just because the anger of the Lord is kindled against Israel and moved David against them to number Israel and Judah, doesn't mean that David was right in numbering Israel and Judah, right? So he's going to recognize it himself that it's wrong. Would that parallel what happens in the understanding that July 18 is on a line of failed predictions, and that it's meant to correct the movement, even before the disappointment itself? Can we see that fits? Because it's pretty obvious that the movement was not prepared for the responsibility that would be put upon its shoulders if July 18th had happened as predicted. Any thoughts on that?
So you're saying that David recognized it was wrong before he began the number?
No, after he had started numbering, he begins to recognize he had sinned, right? According to the text here. So if we read on, it says, "For the king said to Joab, the captain of the host, which was with him, Go now through all the tribes of Israel from Dan even to Beersheba, and number ye the people, that I may know the number of the people." Now this, of course, the symbol of Dan to Beersheba, Jeff had dealt with as a symbol, right? Which we probably could look into again a bit more about this phrase. "And Joab said unto the king, Now the Lord thy God add unto the people how many soever they be, 100-fold, and that the eyes of my lord the king may see it. By why doth my lord the king delight in this thing?" So even Joab doesn't think this is a good idea. "Notwithstanding, the king's word prevailed against Joab and against the captains of the host. And Joab and the captains of the host went out from the presence of the king to number the people of Israel. And they passed over Jordan and pitched in Aurora on the right side of the city that lieth in the midst of the river of Gad toward Jazer. And they came to Gilead and to the land of Tatim-Hoshi, and they came to Dan Jaan and about to Zidon, and came to the stronghold of Tyre and to all the cities of the Hivites and the Canaanites, and they went to the south of Judah, even to Beersheba. And when they had gone through all the land, they came to Jerusalem at the end of 9 months and 20 days. And Joab gave up the sum of the number of the people unto the king, and there were in Israel 800,000 valiant men that drew the sword, and the men of Judah were 500,000 men. And David's heart smote him after that he had numbered the people, and David said unto the Lord, I have sinned greatly." So I guess he's numbered the people, but he's not being rebuked of the Lord. He's being rebuked of his own self, I guess, is the way that it is here, right? So even though he's numbered the people already, he's not waiting till some prophet comes and tells him he's done something wrong. He's going to recognize it himself. Okay, I guess that I was getting that mixed up. He says, I've sinned greatly in that I have done, and now I beseech thee, O Lord, take away the iniquity of thy servant, for I've done very foolishly. Okay, so David's heart smote him after that he had numbered the people, not before. For when David was up in the morning, the word of the Lord came unto the prophet Gad, David's seer, saying, Go and say unto David, Thus saith the Lord, I offer thee 3 things. Choose thee one of them, that I may do it unto thee. Okay, so we've been through this before. So they got 3 things that are being offered: 7 years of famine to come unto the land, fleeing from the enemy 3 months, and then pursuing you, right? Or that there be 3 days pestilence in thy land. Now advise and see what answer I shall return to him that sent me. And David said unto Gad, I am in a great strait. Let us fall now into the hand of the Lord, for his mercies are great, and let me not fall into the hand of man. So the Lord sent a pestilence upon Israel from the morning even to the time appointed. And there died of the people from Dan even to Beersheba 70,000 men. Now, so 3 days pestilence. So from the morning even to the time appointed, so to the 3 days, and you're going to have 70,000 men. So what could we do with this story? How does this fit into what we're talking about here? What are these 3 options? So 7 years of famine, what is that? And Angela put this thing here in 1 Chronicles 21:1, where it says, Satan stood up against Israel and provoked David to number Israel, which is kind of interesting. So we have on one hand, so just kind of skipping back, where it says, again, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he moved David against them to say, Go number Israel and Judah. Where in 1 Chronicles 21, is it 1 Chronicles 20? And Satan stood up against Israel and provoked David to number Israel. So what do we do with this apparent discrepancy?
Well, in my Bible for 2 Samuel 24:1, it says in the margin, that he is Satan.
Okay, so in 2 Samuel 24:1, so it's going to say, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and Satan moved David against them to say, Go number Israel and Judah. So they're just going to say the he is Satan, even though Satan hasn't been mentioned in this section at all, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So are they reading into the text something that we just notice, or is there some other way that we could address this?
Well, why would God move David to take a census if God was later to plague him for doing so?
Okay. So why would did God lead in us giving the understanding of July 18, 2020? Was that of God? Or was that of Satan?
Well, I believe that was of God, but it was our attitude that God is angry with us about. It's not the giving of that message.
So can't both be true?
What do you mean can't both be true?
Well, can't it both be true that Satan is involved and God is also involved?
Well, yeah, it's a great controversy.
Yeah. And God allows David to do something, right? But ultimately, it's not really God's will, right? God doesn't want to have these things occur. Because when I look at July 18th, so getting back to what I was saying, so Parminder sets in motion this time setting. If it wasn't for Parminder, we wouldn't have had any time setting. Parminder is satanic, right? That would be the Satan side provoking, standing up against Israel and provoking David to number Israel. But also we can see that God's hand is in it, right? Satan's hand is more in the November 9th one. God's hand's more in the July 18th, but both are time setting. Now, I just want to see if Ellen White has any particular.
The quote I was talking about is Patriarchs and Prophets 7:48. I can't get it to paste onto the.
747 and 748.
Yeah, that's right. The one that I was talking about is talking about the people being proud.
Yeah, okay. So like when we read it here, intercourse with heathen peoples led to a desire to follow their national customs and kindled ambition for worldly greatness. We can definitely see that within the movement. As the people of Jehovah, Israel was to be honored, but as pride and self-confidence increased, the Israelites were not content with this preeminence. They cared rather for their standing among other nations. Their spirit could not fail to invite temptation. This spirit could not fail to invite temptation. With a view to extending his conquests among foreign nations, David determined to increase his army by requiring military service from all who were of proper age. To effect this, it became necessary to take a census of the population. It was pride and ambition that prompted this action of the king. The numbering of the people would show the contrast between the weakness of the kingdom when David ascended the throne and its strength and prosperity under his rule. This would tend still further to foster the already too great self-confidence of both king and people. The scripture says Satan stood up against Israel and provoked David to number Israel. So there she's going to quote the passage from 1 Chronicles 21, verse 1. Right?
I tried to place that quote on the chat, but it won't let me do it.
What's this?
I said I tried to place that on the chat, but it wouldn't let me do it.
I wonder why.
I don't know why it's like it's blocking it for some reason or another.
No, you shouldn't be blocked from sharing on the chat. No, you have no block here, so I'm not sure why. Okay. Anyway, she's going to quote that passage rather than the one in Samuel, 2 Samuel 24. She's going to quote the one in 1 Chronicles 21, verse 1. The prosperity of Israel under David had been due to the blessing of God rather than the ability of her king or the strength of her armies. But the increasing of the military resources of the kingdom would give the impression to surrounding nations that Israel's trust was in her armies and not in the power of Jehovah. Though the people of Israel were proud of their national greatness, they did not look with favor upon David's plan for so greatly extending the military service. So now, of course, our time is almost up here. So that's pretty interesting that she uses that verse. I'm just going to go. I'm going to go to if she quotes the 2 Samuel 24:1. Yeah, that doesn't help us. The work of numbering Israel is not fully completed before David feels convicted. Oh, this is where I'd read. So he actually felt convicted before it was fully completed. I knew I'd read that somewhere. That he has committed a great sin against God. He sees his error and humbles himself before God, confessing his great sin in foolishly numbering the people. But his repentance came too late. The word had already gone forth from the Lord to his faithful prophet to carry a message to David and offer him his choice of punishments for his transgression. Okay, so we don't have anything particularly about that verse 1 of 2 Samuel 24. But anyway, we'll come back and look at this tomorrow. So this numbering, and there's a number of things, no pun intended, regarding this numbering, because, and I think it's good that Dwight brought this up, because we obviously understand that numbering has to do with numbers, right? And so I think there's something here that we have to examine that will help us. But any final thoughts before we close with prayer? Okay, let's pray. Dear Father in heaven, we are grateful for the time that we have together, for the fellowship that we can have in studying your word. And we just ask that you can continue to work upon our hearts and that you can guide and direct in these studies. Help us in our personal study to look at these things and to receive what it is that you want us to see. Thank you for each person. May you bless them. May you help us in the things that we do today, that we may glorify you. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.